The snow had been falling for 3 hours, and no one was coming. Elena Vasquez knew this the way she knew most painful things, quietly, without drama, in the space between one breath and the next. She sat on the floor of her apartment, back against the couch, knees pulled to her chest, a mug of tea going cold between her palms. The Christmas tree in the corner blinked on and off, on and off. The strand of lights had a loose connection she had never gotten around to fixing, and tonight, alone on Christmas Eve, she decided she never would. Some things were allowed to stay broken. The phone on the cushion beside her had not rung in 4 hours. She had called her mother at 6, voicemail. She had sent a message to her brother at 7. A single gray check mark, delivered, not read. By 8 o'clock she had stopped checking, because the checking itself had become its own kind of pain, a small wound she kept pressing with her thumb. Outside, the city was alive. She could hear it through the thin walls, the laughter of neighbors, the distant sound of a holiday party 2 floors up, someone's child shrieking with joy at something wonderful. The world was full tonight, every corner of it lit and warm and crowded with people who loved each other. And Elena sat on her floor and listened to it like music from another country. She was 26 years old. She had a job she was good at, a city she had chosen deliberately, a life she had built with her own hands from the rubble of everything that came before. She did not feel sorry for herself. She had made a rule about that years ago, the same year she had learned that self-pity was a room with no windows and a door that locked from the inside. But tonight the rule felt harder to keep. She reached for her phone not to check messages, she told herself, just to look at the time, and saw instead a notification she had not expected. A call incoming right now. The name on the screen stopped her breath entirely. Camilla Reyes. Elena stared at it for 2 full seconds, long enough for the moment to become strange, long enough for her heart to do something complicated and involuntary behind her ribs. Then she answered, "I know it's late." Camilla's voice was the same as she remembered, low, certain, the voice of someone who had grown up in rooms where certainty was the only safe currency. "I know we haven't spoken. Don't say anything yet, just listen." Elena said nothing. She was good at that. "I'm at my father's house," Camilla continued. "The whole family is here, my uncle's children, my cousins, my father's associates." A pause that contained multitudes. "It's loud and it's too warm and everyone is pretending that nothing has changed. And I am standing in the kitchen holding a glass of wine. I haven't touched and thinking about you sitting alone in that apartment." "I'm fine," Elena said. "I didn't ask." Another silence. The Christmas tree blinked. "On, off, come home," Camilla said. "I mean it. Come to my father's house tonight. I'll send a car. You'll be here in 40 minutes. Elena almost laughed. "Almost, Camilla. I can't walk into your father's house on Christmas Eve." "I don't." She searched for the right words and found too many of them. "I don't belong in that world. You belong wherever I say you belong." It was said without arrogance, only with the absolute calm of someone who had never once doubted the weight of their own name. "And I'm saying it, come." The call ended before Elena could answer. She sat with the dead phone in her hand and looked at the blinking tree and thought about all the reasons this was a terrible idea. There were many. They were good reasons, solid and practical, built from everything she knew about the Reyes family and the world they occupied, and the particular kind of danger that lived inside beautiful things. Camilla Reyes was the daughter of Dominic Reyes, and Dominic Reyes was not a man you wandered into casually on Christmas Eve. The car arrived in 32 minutes. It was black, obviously, long, obviously. The driver did not speak, did not turn his head, did not acknowledge her existence beyond the single nod that indicated she should get in. Elena got in because she had already made the decision the moment she'd stood up from her floor and gone to change her clothes, and she had long since learned not to negotiate with decisions she had already made. The city slid past the windows. Holiday lights blurred into streaks of gold and red. Children in coats too large for them pressed their faces against shop windows. Elena watched it all and kept her hands very still in her lap. the way she did when she needed to appear calmer than she was. She had met Camilla 2 years ago, in a context so ordinary it still seemed improbable. A coffee shop, a shared table during a rainstorm, a conversation that began with an apology about elbow room and ended 3 hours later with both of them missing whatever they had been on their way to. Camilla had not mentioned her last name until the 4th time they met. And by then, Alina had already decided she liked her, which meant that the information arrived too late to do what it should have done. She had looked up Dominic Reyes that same evening. She had not slept well for several days afterward. The Reyes family was old money layered over older power. They operated, depending on who you asked, in import and export, real estate development, private security. Depending on who you really asked, in things that didn't have clean names and didn't get discussed in daylight. Dominic Reyes had never been charged with anything. He had never needed to be. The law in his proximity tended to develop a kind of polite blindness. Camilla had never pretended this wasn't true. That was the thing about her that Alina couldn't untangle. She wore her family's reality with the same calm she wore everything else. Not proud, not ashamed, simply clear-eyed. This is what we are. Now tell me what you are. The car turned through a gate. Alina looked up. The word house was the wrong word. It was a compound, really, though that word also felt insufficient. Stone walls, iron gates that had already been drawn open. A long driveway lined with trees wrapped in white lights, so that walking toward the house felt like moving through a corridor of small stars. At the end of it, the house itself rose 3 stories, Georgian in its bones, warm light burning in every window. There were other cars, many other cars. Alina felt the first real flutter of something she refused to call fear. The driver opened her door without being asked. She stepped out into the cold and for a moment simply stood there, snowflakes landing on the shoulders of her dark coat, looking up at a house full of people who all shared a last name that meant something specific and serious in this city. The front door opened before she reached it. Camilla stood in the frame, backlit, wearing something deep green that made her look like she'd been painted into the scene. She was smiling, the small, real smile, not the public one Alina had learned to distinguish after months of knowing her. "You came," Camilla said. "You didn't give me much choice. I gave you every choice." Camilla stepped back to let her through. "You made the interesting one." The warmth of the house hit Alina like a wall. Sound hit her next, voices, music, the clink of glasses, a child's laughter ringing from somewhere above. The entrance hall was marble, floored and hung with holly, a staircase curving upward on the right, a hallway stretching into brightness ahead. It smelled of pine and something roasting in expensive candles. It smelled, Alina thought, exactly like Christmas was supposed to smell, in all the versions of Christmas she had never actually had. "Everyone is in the main room," Camilla said, her hand briefly, lightly at Alina's back. "My father's associates are mostly keeping to the study. You won't have to deal with them. My cousins are loud but harmless. My uncle is asleep in the armchair and has been since 7 and no one is going to wake him. And your father?" Alina asked. A beat. "My father," Camilla said carefully, "is being my father." She heard him before she saw him. Not his voice, though his voice, when she encountered it later, turned out to be exactly what she would have predicted. Low, unhurried, the voice of someone who had never once needed to raise it. Be heard? What she heard first was the silence that preceded him, the way conversation in the main room dipped slightly when he moved through it, the way bodies adjusted almost imperceptibly to account for his direction. Dominic Reyes was 50, 3 years old, and looked, Alina thought, like someone had taken the concept of authority and decided to make it into a person. He was tall, genuinely tall, not just taller than average, and the darkness of his suit was the kind of darkness that cost more than her monthly rent. His hair was silver at the temples, dark everywhere else. His face was, she searched for a word and settled on composed. Not handsome exactly, though he was that too, composed, like every feature had been arranged with deliberate care and had stayed exactly where it was told. He saw her the moment she entered the room. She knew it because the room was large and crowded, and there was no logical reason his eyes should have found her so immediately. But they did, dark eyes, precise and unhurried, that swept over her in a single motion and told her nothing about what they found. Camilla materialized at her elbow. "Papa, this is Alina, the friend I told you about. You told me very little," Dominic Reyes said. He crossed the room toward them with the unhurried certainty of someone who had never once been in a hurry and never intended to be. He stopped at a distance that was polite but evaluating. "Miss Vasquez." Elena met his gaze, Mr. Reyes, a silence that lasted exactly long enough to mean something. "You're cold," he said. "Someone should have taken your coat." It was not an apology. It was not a welcome. It was a statement of fact delivered to the room in general, and within 30 seconds someone had appeared to take her coat, because in Dominic Reyes' house, statements of fact had a way of becoming reality very quickly. He moved away without another word. Camilla exhaled beside her. "See," she said quietly. "Harmless." Elena looked at the space he had just occupied. "That is not the word I would use." The evening moved the way evenings in powerful houses tend to move, with a kind of orchestrated ease that looked effortless and wasn't. Glasses were refilled before they emptied. Food appeared and disappeared. Conversations bloomed and closed like flowers on a timer. Elena watched it all with the particular attention of someone who had learned early that the safest thing you could do in an unfamiliar room was understand it before it understood you. Camilla had been pulled away by a cousin, a tall girl with Camilla's same dark eyes and a louder version of her laugh, and Elena had let her go without protest, drifting instead toward the edge of the room where the fireplace burned, and the noise was slightly softer. She held a glass of wine she was drinking slowly and carefully, the way you drank when you needed to look occupied without actually becoming less sharp. She was watching a group of children chase each other around the legs of adults who had long since stopped noticing them, when she became aware that she was being watched in return. Not by Camilla. She turned her head slightly, the way you did when you wanted to confirm something without confirming that you were confirming it, and found Dominic Reyes standing across the room with a glass of something amber, speaking to a man in a dark suit, his eyes on Elena with the same unhurried precision they had held before. He did not look away when she caught him looking. That was the thing that unsettled her most, not the looking itself, but the complete absence of any pretense about it. Most people, caught staring, would glance away, would manufacture a sudden interest in the middle distance. Dominic Reyes simply held her gaze for one additional second, as if to confirm that yes, he had been looking, and yes, he intended to continue, and no, her awareness of it changed nothing for him. Then he returned his attention to the man beside him. Elena turned back to the fire and told herself that her pulse had not changed. It had slightly. She was honest enough to admit that, at least to herself. She spent the next hour in the pleasant, manageable company of Camilla's cousins, who were exactly as Camilla had described, loud, warm, enthusiastic in the way of people who had grown up in a house where there was always enough of everything. They asked her the questions people asked at family gatherings. Where did she work? How did she know Camilla? Did she live in the city? Did she like the city? Elena answered everything truthfully and briefly, and felt herself relax incrementally into the ordinariness of it. This was just a house, these were just people. Christmas was Christmas everywhere. She almost believed it. Then Camilla appeared at her side with a look on her face that Elena had learned to read, a careful arrangement of calm that meant something underneath was not calm at all. "My father wants to speak with you," Camilla said. The cousins melted tactfully away, as if they too had learned to read that particular arrangement of Camilla's features. "Speak with me," Elena repeated in the study. Camilla paused. "You don't have to. You said that last time too," Elena said quietly, "and I got in the car anyway." Something moved across Camilla's face, gratitude, or maybe it's more complicated, cousin. "The study is at the end of the hall. He's already there." Elena set down her wine glass. She smoothed the front of her dress with both hands. One small gesture she allowed herself, the only external evidence of anything. Then she walked toward the hallway. The study smelled of old paper and cedar, and the particular kind of quiet that accumulated in rooms where serious things had been decided over many years. Bookshelves covered 3 walls from floor to ceiling. A desk that could have anchored a ship sat near the window, its surface clear except for a single lamp, a glass, and a folder that had been closed and pushed to one side with the deliberateness of something being put away before company arrived. Dominic Reyes stood with his back to the door, looking out the window at the snow-covered garden, his hands clasped behind him. He did not turn when Elena entered. He let the door close behind her. She heard the soft click of it, and still he did not turn. She stood and waited. She was good at waiting. She had been good at it since she was 9 years old, and had learned that sometimes waiting was the most powerful thing you could do, because it refused to give the other person what they were expecting, which was movement or noise or the small sounds of someone becoming uncomfortable. 40 seconds passed. She knew because she counted. Then he turned. "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine standing." The line of his jaw shifted by approximately 1 millimeter. She suspected that was the equivalent, for him, of visible surprise. "As you like," he said, and moved to the desk, not sitting behind it, a choice she noted, but leaning against its edge in a way that was almost casual, except that nothing about him was actually casual. "I'll be direct, please," she said. "Camilla cares about you." He said it the way you stated a geographical fact and not an opinion, not an observation, simply the lay of the land. "She has for some time. I pay attention to the people my daughter cares about. It's a practice I've maintained for her entire life, and it has served us both well." Elena held his gaze. "That sounds almost like a compliment, and almost like a threat." The corner of his mouth moved. It was so small, she wasn't certain she'd seen it. "It is an explanation," he said. "I had you looked into, Miss Vasquez, some time ago, before tonight. The room felt marginally smaller." "And," she said, "and you are exactly what you appear to be." He tilted his head slightly, studying her the way she imagined he studied most things, as problems to be fully understood before any action was taken. Which, in my experience, is either very reassuring or very suspicious. Which is it for me? Another almost pause. "I haven't decided." She held herself very still. "Is that why I'm here, so you can decide? You're here." He said, "Because my daughter asked you here, and what my daughter asks for, she generally receives. That is my doing, and I am aware of it." He picked up his glass from the desk and held it without drinking from it. "I wanted to see you in this house, in this context. People reveal themselves in rooms like this." "And what have I revealed?" He looked at her for a long moment. The snow outside the window fell silently. The lamp on the desk cast everything in gold and shadow. Somewhere distant in the house, someone laughed, bright and brief, and completely belonging to a different world than the one that existed in this room right now. "That you are not afraid of me," he said, "which means either you are foolish or you know something that makes fear seem unnecessary. Or," Elena said, "I simply don't believe that fear is useful." The silence that followed was different from the ones before it. Heavier somehow, more considered. Dominic Reyes looked at her with something that was not quite assessment anymore. Something more like the moment just after assessment ended and something else began. Something that didn't have a clean name. Camilla chose well, he said finally. It landed differently than she expected, not like a verdict, but like something reluctantly true. She didn't answer. He set down his glass. Enjoy the rest of the evening, Miss Vasquez. She understood she was being dismissed. She moved toward the door. Her hand was on the handle when he spoke again. Your mother's name was Isabella Vasquez, he said. She worked for a man named Carrero in the 90s, before you were born. Alina's hand stopped moving. I mention it, he said, his voice exactly as level as it had been every moment since she walked in, only because it occurred to me, looking at you tonight, that you have her eyes. She turned around very slowly. Dominic Reyes was looking out the window again, his back to her, his hands clasped behind him once more, as if the conversation had concluded and he had simply returned to wherever he'd been before. It began, how do you know what my mother's eyes looked like? Elena said. He said nothing. The snow fell outside the window. The lamp burned on the desk, and in the space between Elena's question and his silence, something cracked open, hairline thin, barely visible, but there. The shape of something much larger than Christmas Eve beginning to show through. She left the study with her hands steady and her thoughts moving very fast. Camilla found her in the hallway. One look at Elena's face and the ease drained out of Camilla's expression entirely. She took Elena by the arm and drew her through a door into a smaller sitting room. Dim, unused, cold compared to the rest of the house, smelling of disuse and old roses from a dried arrangement on the mantel. What did he say to you? He knew my mother, Elena said. Camilla went very still. He said her name. He said she worked for someone named Carrero. He said. Elena stopped. Organized the information the way she organized everything that mattered, precisely, in sequence, without letting emotion disrupt the architecture. He said I have her eyes. The silence between them was the kind that happened when someone was deciding how much of a thing to say. Camilla, Elena's voice was quiet and very clear. What do you know about this? Nothing. Camilla said it immediately, and Elena was good enough at listening to people to know that immediately was its own kind of answer. Then, almost nothing. Elena, I swear to you I didn't. What do you know? Camilla sat down on the arm of a chair and pressed one hand briefly to her mouth, a gesture of containment. My father mentioned, once a long time ago, that he had known a woman named Vasquez. I didn't connect it to you. Your name is common enough, and you never talked about your mother, and I never. She stopped. I never asked. You never asked. Elena repeated softly, because I didn't want to make it something it might not be. And now, Camilla looked up at her. In the dim light, she looked younger, not like the composed, certain person she presented to the world, but like someone standing at the edge of something she hadn't chosen to stand at. Now I think it might be something. Elena sat down. Not in a chair. There wasn't one close enough, and her legs had developed an opinion about distance. But on the window seat, her back to the cold glass, the snow falling silently behind her. She thought about her mother. She thought about the particular quality of her mother's silence on the subject of her past, a silence Elena had always interpreted as pain and had never pushed against out of a daughter's mercy. She thought about the year her mother had spent 3 months somewhere that wasn't explained, when Elena was 11. The relatives who appeared and disappeared like weather. The phone calls taken in other rooms. The name Carrero, which she had heard exactly once, spoken in a low voice to someone Elena had never seen before or after, and which had dropped into her memory like a stone into still water, sinking without trace but changing the composition of everything beneath. Carrero, she said aloud. Who is he? Who was he? He was, Camilla chose her words, a man my father had dealings with a long time ago, before things were, she paused, before things were what they are now. What kind of dealings? The kind, Camilla said carefully, that my father doesn't discuss. Elena looked at her. And my mother worked for him. If my father said so, your father. Elena said it like he was telling me something he'd been waiting to tell me, like it wasn't an accident, like he knew exactly what it would do. Another silence. Camilla's hands were clasped in her lap. tight enough that the knuckles showed. Why would he do that? Elena asked. Why tonight? Why at all? Because, Camilla said slowly, my father does nothing without reason, and he doesn't reveal information unless he's decided that revealing it serves a purpose. She met Elena's eyes. The question is what purpose? From somewhere in the house, a clock began to chime. Deep, slow strokes counting the hour. Elena counted without meaning to. 10, 11, 12, midnight. Christmas. The chimes faded. The house settled around them. And in the cold, dim sitting room, with dried roses on the mantel and snow against the glass, something that had been in motion for much longer than one evening continued its turn, like a wheel that had been set rolling years before either of them had known there was a wheel at all. She should have left. She knew this. She knew it with the clean, unambiguous clarity that she trusted above most other forms of knowing. The clarity that arrived not from thinking, but from the part of her that had been keeping her safe her whole life, the part that recognized exits and measured distances, and knew the difference between a room that was safe to be in. She was awake before the house was. The clock on the bedside table read 6:40, 7 when Elena gave up the pretense of sleep and sat up, drawing her knees to her chest in the gray early light that came through the gap in curtains. The snow had stopped sometime in the night. The world outside the window was white and absolutely still, the kind of stillness that existed only in the early hours of holidays when even the city remembered how to be quiet. She had not slept more than 2 hours in total. She had spent the rest of the time doing what she did when something refused to resolve itself. She had taken it apart. Methodically, piece by piece, laid every element out in her mind the way you laid documents on a table, and then looked at them from every angle until the shape of the thing became clear. Her mother, Isabella Vasquez, a woman Elena had loved with the particular fierce tenderness of daughters who understood early that their mothers were both more and less than the versions presented to them. Isabella had been quiet in the way of people who had chosen silence deliberately, who had looked at all their available options and decided that saying less was safer than saying more. She had worked 2 jobs for most of Elena's childhood. She had never complained. She had made Christmas remarkable on a budget that should have made it impossible. And she had died 4 years ago of something sudden and cardiac and utterly without warning, leaving Elena alone in a hospital corridor at 2 in the morning with a paper cup of cold coffee and the specific devastation of a grief she had never fully found the bottom of. She had left nothing behind that explained anything, no letters, no journals, no box of photographs with names written on the back. Just a small apartment full of ordinary things and a silence that had, it turned out, been structural, load-bearing, the kind that when removed left a person standing in rubble they hadn't known was a building. Elena dressed quietly. Dark jeans, a soft gray sweater she had borrowed from the bag Camilla had sent up the previous evening with a note that said only in case in Camilla's clean, decisive handwriting. She pulled her hair back. She did not look at herself in the mirror for longer than necessary. Then she went to find Dominic Reyes. He was exactly where she had imagined him. The study door was open barely a few inches, enough that she could see the lamplight still burning against the gray morning and the shape of him behind the desk, this time seated reading. Something in a folder, she suspected, was the same one that had been closed and put aside the night before. He had changed dark trousers, a white shirt without the jacket, the sleeves rolled to the forearm in a way that was the only concession to informality she had yet seen in him. A cup of coffee sat at his elbow, still steaming. She knocked on the open door. He looked up. His expression did not change, but something in it shifted. A recalibration, quick and invisible, like a compass needle swinging to find north. "Miss Vasquez," he said, "I want to talk about my mother." He looked at her for 3 full seconds without speaking. Then he said, "Come in, close the door." She did both. He did not gesture toward a chair this time. She took one anyway, pulling it slightly closer to the desk than it had been placed. A small act of territorial adjustment that she was aware of making and did deliberately. She sat. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked at him with the same directness she had offered him the previous night and said, without preamble, "How did you know her?" He leaned back in his chair. In the morning light he looked not older exactly, but more human. The sharp composure of the previous evening had a slightly different quality at 6 in the morning, as though the version of himself he wore for public hours had not yet been fully assembled, and she was seeing something closer to the original material. "Your mother and I met in 1993. He said. "She was working for a man named Carrero. I've mentioned him. He and I had overlapping interests at that time." A pause. She was not in his business. She worked in his household. She was young, 20 to 23. She would have been 22 in 1993, Alina said quietly. He nodded once. She was very capable, very composed for her age. Carrero valued that. She ran his household schedule, handled logistics. He picked up his coffee and held it without drinking. We crossed paths regularly over the course of approximately 2 years. And we became, he chose the word with visible care, like selecting a tool for a precise job. Acquainted, Alina felt something tighten in her chest, not jealousy, nothing so simple. Something more like the feeling of a puzzle piece hovering over its place and not yet being pressed down. Acquainted, she repeated. She was someone I respected. He said, and the slight change in his voice on the word respected was so small that she would have missed it if she hadn't been listening with every instrument she had. She saw things clearly. In a world where most people saw what they wanted to see, she saw what was actually there. It was remarkable in someone so young. "You're describing her like she was a long time ago," Alina said. "She died 4 years ago. Did you know that?" Something moved across his face. Fast, gone before she could fully catalog it, but she saw its shadow. "Yes," he said, one word, but the weight of it. "How?" Alina asked. "How did you know?" "I kept track." He said, and he said it simply, without decoration, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and he saw no reason to pretend otherwise. Alina stared at him. "You kept track of my mother for 30 years, not continuously." A pause, "Not always, but I knew where she was. I knew she had a daughter. I knew the daughter's name." He set down the cup. "I knew when she died." The room was very quiet. Outside, a bird moved through the snow, heavy branches of a tree beyond the window. Alina heard the soft percussion of dislodged snow falling. Why? Her voice was level, but it cost her. Because some people, he stopped, started again, with the slight adjustment of someone who had prepared for this question, and was now finding that the prepared answer was insufficient. Because some people, once you have known them properly, do not simply stop mattering because time passes or circumstances change. Alina's hands tightened in her lap. "She never mentioned you, not once. I know. She kept everything about her past. I know," he said again. Quieter this time. "Why would she do that?" Alina asked, and here, finally, was where the controlled clarity started to develop a fault line. Not in her voice, she held that steady, but in the space behind her eyes, the pressure of 6 years of unanswered questions that had just been handed a possible answer and didn't know what to do with it. If you mattered, if whatever happened between you mattered, why would she never? Because I asked her not to. The fault line widened. Alina did not speak. Dominic Reyes looked at her across the desk in the gray morning light, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something in his face that was not composure. It was brief, a matter of seconds, but it was real. A kind of fatigue or regret, or the particular expression of someone looking at a consequence they chose and have never fully stopped accounting for. "In 1995, he said, certain things changed in my world, the nature of my work, the nature of my risks." He said it carefully, each word placed precisely. "I made a decision that the people I cared about should not be visible, should not be connected to me in ways that could be found. I asked your mother to step back, to create distance, to allow a version of events in which we had simply lost touch." "And she agreed," Alina said. "She disagreed initially, strongly." Something that could have been the ghost of a different expression passed over his face. Your mother was not someone who accepted decisions made on her behalf without challenge. No. Elena said softly, she wasn't, but she understood ultimately why it was necessary, and she honored it completely, entirely. He paused. I underestimated how completely. Elena heard what lived inside those last 4 words, the thing he hadn't said, the version of completely that had apparently included 30 years of silence and a daughter who had grown up with a mother who carried the whole story alone and died with it intact. You cut her off, Elena said, to protect her, yes. And then you spent 30 years keeping track of her from a distance, yes. Did it occur to you? Elena said, her voice very quiet, very controlled, the quietest and most controlled she had been in this entire conversation, that watching from a distance is not the same as protecting someone. That she might have needed, that she might have been. She stopped, pressed her palms flat on the desk in front of her, a single physical gesture that contained everything she was not saying. She was alone. For most of my childhood she was alone. She worked 2 jobs and she never explained anything, and she was so quiet about it. So she carried it so quietly, and you were out there, keeping track, and she stopped. She would not cry, not here. Not in front of this man who had been a ghost in her mother's life, and was now sitting 3 feet away from her in the solid, undeniable flesh. She would not, and, he said, gently, it was the most gently she had heard him say anything, and she deserved better than that, Elena said. Whatever the reasons were, whatever the risks were, she looked at him directly. She deserved someone who stayed. The silence that followed was unlike any of the ones before it. It wasn't evaluating. It wasn't strategic. It was the silence of something true having been said by someone who had the standing to say it, landing on someone who had no defense against it. Dominic Reyes said nothing. His jaw moved once a tightening. His hands, flat on the desk, were very still. He did not look away from her, and in his eyes, dark, precise, always so carefully controlled, Elena saw something she had not expected to see, and would not have believed if she hadn't been looking directly at it. Not guilt exactly, something older than guilt, something that had been sitting behind everything else for a very long time, waiting in a room with no windows, growing heavier in the dark. She pushed her chair back. She stood. She was not shaking. She checked carefully, the way you checked something important, and she was not shaking. Thank you for telling me, she said. She meant it. She was aware of meaning it even through everything else she felt, which was complicated and layered, and would take time she did not currently have to fully understand. She walked to the door. Miss Vasquez. She turned. He was still seated, still looking at her, and in the morning light with his sleeves rolled and the careful armor of his public self not yet fully in place, he looked like a man who had been carrying something for 30 years and had just this morning set it down for the first time. She talked about you, he said. In the last conversation we had, years before she died, he paused. She said you were going to be someone who saw things clearly. Elena stood in the doorway and felt the weight of that sentence settle over her. The specific gravity of being known by your mother to someone you had never met, of being discussed in a conversation you would never be told about, of being a child who was loved in rooms you were not in. She did not trust her voice for a full 5 seconds. She was right, she said finally, about most things. She walked out. The hallway was empty and pale with morning light, and Elena walked to the end of it and stood at the window that looked over the back garden and pressed one hand flat against the cold glass and just breathed in and out, slow and deliberate. The garden below was a white geometry of snow-covered hedges and dormant flower beds, untouched and perfect, a world that had been frozen in the night and was only now beginning to consider thawing. She heard a footstep behind her, not Camilla's step. She knew Camilla's step by now. This one was slower, more deliberate. She did not turn around. She kept a photograph, said a voice she hadn't expected, not Dominic, not Camilla. A man's voice, older, rough at the edges in the way of voices that had spent decades in cold places. Your mother, she kept it in her wallet until the day she died. Elena turned. Standing at the end of the hallway was a man she had not seen the previous night. 60, perhaps older. heavy through the shoulders, with the kind of face that had been handsome once, and had become something more interesting than handsome with age. He was looking at her with an expression she could not immediately classify. "Who are you?" she said. "My name is Teodoro," he said. "I worked with your mother for 3 years." He paused. "And I am the reason she had to leave." Teodoro did not wait to be asked into the conversation. He moved down the hallway with the careful gait of a man whose body had accumulated a history of hard use, and he stopped a few feet from Elena and looked at her with the same unsettling directness. That seemed, she was beginning to understand, to be a quality shared by everyone in this house. As though the Ray's world selected for people who had decided, at some point, that looking away was a luxury they could not afford. "You should sit down," he said. "I've been told that twice in this house," Elena said. "I'm beginning to think it means something bad is coming." The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile exactly, the suggestion of one, the shadow of a capacity for it. "It means I'm going to tell you something that will take a moment to absorb. Then tell me standing." He looked at her for a beat. Then he nodded once, with the air of a man who recognized stubbornness because he had spent a lifetime practicing it himself. Your mother didn't leave Carrero's household because Dominic asked her to, he said. That is, what Dominic believes is not wrong, exactly, but it is not complete. He folded his hands in front of him, a gesture that was almost formal, like someone preparing to deliver testimony. She left because I went to her and told her she had to, because there was a man, one of Carrero's associates, a man named Voss, who had become aware of her relationship with Dominic, of what she knew. Elena's breathing stayed even. She made it stay even. Voss was dangerous in a very specific way. Teodoro continued. He did not act quickly. He was patient. He collected information and he waited, and he used things at the moment they would cause the most damage. He had done this to others. People connected to Dominic. He paused. I went to your mother privately, without Dominic's knowledge. I told her that if she stayed, if she remained visible, Voss would eventually use her, as leverage, as a method of getting to Dominic. So you told her to disappear, Elena said. I told her the truth, Teodoro said, which is that the safest thing she could do, for herself, and for the child she was carrying, was to become someone Voss could not find. The hallway went very quiet. Elena heard her own heartbeat. She heard it with unusual clarity, the way you heard things when the world had just shifted beneath you, and your body was trying to recalibrate to the new angle. The child she was carrying, she repeated. Teodoro looked at her steadily. Yes, she was pregnant. Yes, with me. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Elena turned back to the window. The garden below was still white and still and perfect. A single set of footprints crossed it, an animal, she thought, something small that had moved through the night and left its passing in the snow and was now long gone. She counted 5 breaths. Then she said, Does Dominic know? The silence that followed her question was a different shape than the ones before it. This one had texture, weight, the specific quality of something that had been held in place for decades by the combined effort of several people and was now, in this gray Christmas morning hallway, finally beginning to give. Teodoro, she said. Her voice was very quiet. Does Dominic Reyes know that my mother was pregnant when she left? No, Teodoro said, one word, and in it the architecture of 30 years. Elena pressed her hand back against the cold glass of the window. The cold moved through her palm up her arm, and she lit it because cold was clarifying, and she needed to be very clear right now. She needed every part of her mind functioning at full capacity, because what had just happened in this hallway was not small thing. It was not a thing that could be processed in a morning or a week or perhaps a year. It was the kind of information that reached back through time and rearranged everything it touched. Her mother's silence, her mother's solitude, the particular quality of grief Isabella Vasquez had carried like something she had agreed to carry and would not put down. She knew. Elena said, not question, she knew, and she chose not to tell him. She chose to keep you safe, Teodoro said. In the world she understood, being connected to Dominic Reyes was not a gift. It was a target. She still should have told him. Yes, Teodoro said simply. She should have. She turned to look at him, then really look at him, with the full attention she had been dividing between him and the window and the interior upheaval of the last 3 minutes. He was watching her with an expression she could now classify. It was the expression of someone who had been living with guilt for so long that it had become simply the condition of their face. Not acute suffering, but the settled, permanent quality of a man who had done something he believed necessary and had never been able to fully convince himself it was right. Why are you telling me this? She said, because I have been telling myself for 26 years that it was not my place to say anything. He said, that the decision was made, that the people involved had chosen their paths, that inserting myself would only cause damage. He paused. And because I came downstairs this morning and I saw Dominic's face after you left his study. Elena waited. I have known that man for 31 years, Teodoro said. I have seen him in situations that would have broken other people. I have never in 31 years seen his face look the way it looked this morning. He stopped. When he continued, his voice was slightly rougher. He looked like someone who had just been told the truth about a wound and realized it had never healed. Elena closed her eyes for 3 seconds. When she opened them, the garden was still there, still white, still perfect. He doesn't know I exist, she said. Not really. He knows Isabella had a daughter. But he doesn't know, no. Teodoro said. He does not know. She nodded once. It was a very controlled nod, the kind that functioned as a lid on something that did not yet have permission. Surface, she started again. I need some time, of course. And Teodoro, she looked at him, why now? Why tell me this morning here in this house? Why not? Why not a letter or a phone call or never? Why now? He was quiet for a moment. Then, because you walked into this house last night, and you stood in front of Dominic Reyes without flinching, and I thought I recognized something. In the way you held yourself, in the way you looked at him. He paused. You have her composure, but you have something else as well. Something that is not from her. Elena said nothing. I thought, Teodoro said carefully, that you deserve to know where it came from. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture that was almost old-fashioned, almost formal, and then he walked back down the hallway and turned the corner and was gone. Elena stood at the window for a long time after. She found Camilla in the kitchen. The rest of the house was still sleeping. It was barely past 7, and Camilla was alone at the large kitchen island with 2 cups of coffee, as though she had known, or had hoped, or had simply made 2 cups out of the stubborn optimism that had always been one of her defining qualities. She looked up when Elena came in, and her expression did the thing it had done the previous night, that swift, precise reading of Elena's face that she had always been unnervingly good at. She did not speak. She pushed one of the cups across the island. Elena sat down on the stool opposite and wrapped both hands around the cup and let the warmth move into her palms. For a moment, she simply sat with it. The kitchen was warm and smelled of coffee and the lingering traces of last night's food. Somewhere in the house a clock was ticking, and it was Christmas morning, and the ground beneath Elena's understanding of her own life had shifted so fundamentally in the last hour that she was still, on some level, waiting to find out where she was standing. I spoke to Teodoro, she said. Camilla's hands went still around her own cup. He told me about Voss. About why my mother really left. She paused. He told me she was pregnant when she went. The silence was absolute. Camilla was looking at her with an expression Elena had never seen on her face before, something fractured and careful, the expression of someone who was simultaneously trying to absorb information and manage their response to it, and failing, slightly, at both. Elena, did you know? Not an accusation, a question. Elena was careful to make it only a question. No. Camilla's voice was immediate and completely unguarded, and Elena believed it without reservation. I swear to you. I knew nothing about Teodoro, about Voss, about any of it. I knew my father had known your mother. I knew it had mattered to him in whatever way things matter to my father. But I did not know. She stopped. Her jaw worked briefly. I did not know the rest. Elena nodded. What are you going to do? Camilla asked. It was the question Elena had been turning over since she left the hallway window, not with the part of her mind that analyzed, but with a quieter part, a part that understood that some decisions couldn't be thought into existence. They had to be waited for. I don't know yet, she said honestly. He deserves to know, Camilla said quietly. Then immediately, I know No, it's not my place to. No, Elena said, you're right. She looked down at her coffee. I've been thinking the same thing. He's going to. Camilla stopped, started again with the slightly unsteady quality of someone navigating unfamiliar emotional territory and aware of it. It's going to change something. For him, fundamentally. She looked at Elena. Are you prepared for that? Elena thought about the study, about the lamplight and the closed folder, and the way Dominic Reyes had said she saw things clearly with something in his voice that was not composure and not control, but something that lived below both of those things, something she now understood had a name and a history and a weight she was only beginning to comprehend. I'm not sure it matters whether I'm prepared, she said. Some things are true whether you're ready for them or not. Camilla was quiet for a moment, then softly, your mother kept it from him to protect you. You understand that? I understand it. Elena said, I don't entirely forgive it. She paused. That's something I'll have to work through. Later, when I have more room for it. And him. Elena looked up. What do you feel? Camilla said carefully about him. Now, it was the question beneath all the other questions, the one that had been present since the previous night, when she had stood in the main room and felt his eyes find her across a crowded space with a precision that had unsettled her before she had any reason to understand why. The one she had been keeping to one side while the more urgent information moved through her. "I don't know," she said. She stopped. "I think I feel the way you feel when you find something you didn't know was missing, which is not a simple feeling." Camilla looked at her for a long moment. Her dark eyes were very soft. "No," she said. "I imagine it isn't." From above them, the house began to stir. Footsteps on the upper floor, a door. A child's voice, high, bright, the uncomplicated joy of someone discovering Christmas morning with no competing information. The day was beginning. Alina finished her coffee, set the cup down, sat with her hands flat on the cool marble of the island, and felt the particular quality of this moment. The moment before something that could not be undone. The last few seconds of the version of the world that had existed until now. "I'm going to talk to him," she said. Camilla nodded just once. "Will you?" Alina paused. "Will you stay close, not in the room, just, I'll be here," Camilla said. "I'm not going anywhere." Alina stood. She straightened her sweater. She pushed her hair back. She did the small, ordinary things that people did when they were about to do something that was not ordinary at all. Because the body needed something to do with its hands while the mind prepared itself. She walked to the kitchen door. "Alina," she turned. Camilla was looking at her from across the island with an expression that contained, Alina thought, more than friendship, something that had been building since a rainy afternoon in a coffee shop 2 years ago and had been waiting, perhaps, for exactly this moment to show its full shape. Love, she thought. The kind that was not simple, not uncomplicated, not without its own weight and history, but real, absolutely real. "Whatever happens," Camilla said, "you're not alone in this." Alina held her gaze for a moment, felt the truth of it settle over her like something solid and warm. "I know," she said. She walked out. The study door was closed. She stood in front of it for 3 full seconds, not hesitating. She told herself, simply arriving. Simply letting the moment be what it was before she changed it. Then she knocked. "Come in." She opened the door. Dominic Reyes was standing at the window again, that window, the one that looked over the snow-covered garden, the same position she had found him in the night before. He turned when she entered, and she saw it immediately, the thing Teodoro had described. The thing on his face that he had not managed to fully reassemble since their conversation at dawn. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and in the space between them, in the study that smelled of cedar and old decisions and the specific gravity of things, said and unsaid over 30 years. The silence was the loudest it had yet been. She closed the door behind her. She said, "There's something you need to know." His eyes moved over her face with the focused attention of a man reading something in a language he knows well, but is seeing written, suddenly, in an unfamiliar hand. She watched him read it. She watched him begin slowly to understand what he was reading. His face did not change, but his hands, which had been clasped behind him in that composed, habitual posture, slowly came apart, and he stood there with his arms at his sides open, for the first time since she had met him, and waited for her to speak. She did not know how to begin. She had been composing it in her mind since the hallway, since Teodoro's voice had delivered its quiet devastation, and she had stood at the cold window and started assembling the words the way you assembled something necessary and difficult, fitting pieces together with care because the thing you were building mattered and could not afford to be fragile. She had thought she was ready. She had thought the preparation was enough. Standing in front of him, she understood that there was no preparation for this. There was only the moment and the words and the irrevocable nature of both. When my mother left, she began, she was pregnant. The room did not change. The lamp burned. The snow lay silent over the garden. The clock on the mantel continued its quiet work. Everything remained exactly as it was, except his face. It did not crumble. It did not collapse. It did nothing dramatic or visible or easy to describe. What happened was subtler and more devastating than any of those things. It was the way a structure looks in the instant before it gives, when the stress has exceeded what it was built to hold, and the material has made its decision, but the eye has not yet caught up. A stillness that was different from his other stillnesses. A stillness that was not composed but suspended. He said nothing. Teodoro told me this morning. Alina continued. She kept her voice even. She owed him that the cleanliness of facts delivered without trembling, without theater. He said he went to her privately, without your knowledge. He told her about Voss. He told her that being connected to you made her a target. She paused. He told her to disappear, and she did. A muscle moved in his jaw, one small movement. She pressed on. She didn't tell you she was pregnant before she left. I don't, she stopped, steadied. I don't know exactly why, whether it was Teodoro's urgency or fear, or whether she thought. She stopped again. It doesn't matter now why. What matters is that she left and she was carrying a child, and she raised that child alone, and she never told you, and she took that silence with her when she died. The clock ticked. He had not moved. He was standing exactly where he had been standing when she walked in 3 feet from the window, arms at his sides, the morning light falling across him in a way that was almost cruel in its clarity, illuminating every line of a face that was working very hard to remain a face and not become something else entirely. She watched him breathe, slow, deliberate, the breathing of someone managing something enormous with the only tool they trusted. The child, he said. His voice was completely level. It was the most frightening thing she had heard from him, that levelness, because she could hear what it was costing. She looked at him directly. Is me, she said. The silence that followed was not like any silence that had existed in this room before. It was total. It was the silence of a world that had just been reorganized at its foundation, and everything on the surface was still settling, still sliding into new positions, still finding out where it would land. Dominic Reyes looked at her. He looked at her the way he had looked at her the night before across the crowded room, with that immediate, precise attention, that compass, needle quality. But it was different now. It was the same precision aimed at something whose full dimensions were only now becoming visible. Something he had been looking at without knowing what he was looking at. The way you could stare at a painting for years and then one morning see the second image hidden inside it and understand that the painting had always been something other than what you thought. He took one step toward her, then stopped. His hands came up slightly, just slightly, a few inches from his sides, and then returned. A motion that began and was recalled, a reach that did not complete itself. Alina, he said, her name. Just her name, in a voice that had lost, completely and without armor, every quality that had characterized it since she had met him. The authority was gone, the precision was gone, the careful, practiced levelness was gone. What was left was something so unguarded that she felt, for a moment, that she was seeing something she should not be allowed to see. Something private in the way that only grief and love and the meeting of the two were private. She felt her throat tighten. She had promised herself she would not cry. I know this is, she started, stopped. I know there's no way to receive this that is, stop. He said it quietly, not harshly. The way you said stop to someone who was trying to make something easier that could not be made easier, and you needed them to understand that their effort, however kind, was not what the moment required. She stopped. He looked at her. She looked at him. The morning light held them both. He crossed the room. He did not stop at the careful social distance he had maintained in every previous interaction. He came close enough that she could see the texture of his shirt, the silver in his hair, the lines around his eyes that were the map of 30 years she had not been present for. He was tall in a way that was different at this proximity, not imposing, not commanding, simply present. Completely, overwhelmingly present. He raised one hand. He held it in the air for a moment, suspended, uncertain, the hand of a man who was not accustomed to uncertainty and was meeting it here, in this room, in this light, for perhaps the first time. Then, with a care that was almost unbearable to watch, he placed it against the side of her face. His palm was warm. Elena did not move. She could feel the slight roughness of his hand, the warmth of it, the weight of it against her jaw and cheekbone. She could feel him looking at her with the full attention of someone who had been looking at a photograph for decades and had just been handed the living person and did not yet know what to do with the reality of them. "She had your eyes," he said, very low, almost to himself. "I said you had her eyes, but she—" He stopped. "She had yours." Elena felt the first tear arrive before she could stop it. Just one. She did not let it be followed. She held the rest back with everything she had. All the composure, all the years of practice, all the discipline of a woman who had learned early that tears were currency, and you spent them, carefully or not at all. The one she could not stop tracked down her cheek, and his thumb, without haste, caught it. Such a small gesture. Such a completely devastating small gesture. "I didn't know," he said. "I want you to understand that. I would have—" He stopped. His jaw tightened. "I would not have let 30 years pass. I would not have let you—" Another stop. She could hear in the interruptions all the things he was refusing to say because they were too large for this room, too large for the morning, too large for a man who had spent his entire life being certain and was standing in the ruins of a certainty he hadn't known he'd had. "I know," she said. "Do you?" His eyes moved over her face. "Because I need you to actually know it. Not to say it to make this easier. I need—" He paused. "I need you to know that if I had known, everything would have been different. That is not a small statement. That is everything. I know," she said again. And this time she meant it differently, not as comfort, not as pacification, but as truth, because she had spent the morning reconstructing the shape of it, and she believed him. Whatever Dominic Reyes was, and had been, and was capable of, she believed that. He lowered his hand. He stepped back, not far, just enough to look at her fully without the proximity that was, she suspected, as unfamiliar and overwhelming for him as it was for her. "Teodoro," he said. It was not a question. It was a name spoken in a tone that contained a conversation she was not going to be part of, a reckoning between two old men that had been building since 1995 and would now, apparently, arrive. "He told me because he thought I deserved to know." Elena said, "Don't." She paused. "Whatever you need to say to him, I'd ask you to remember that he spent 26 years carrying it. So did I." He said, "Without knowing I was carrying it." She had no answer for that. It was true in a way that didn't have a counter-argument. He moved to the desk. He didn't sit. He put both hands flat on its surface and stood with his head slightly bowed, and she watched him do what she understood now was the thing he did when the world exceeded his management of it. He went still, completely still, and somewhere inside the stillness he did whatever he needed to do to remain upright. She stood and let him. She did not fill the silence. She did not offer him anything to hold on to. She simply remained in the room, and her remaining was itself a kind of answer to a question neither of them had asked aloud yet. After a long moment he said, without lifting his head, "What do you want from me?" It was asked without strategy, without the careful, evaluating quality that had characterized every other question he had posed to her. It was asked the way a person asked something when they had run out of armor and were standing in whatever was underneath it, and what was underneath it turned out to be simply a man. Elena thought about the question. She gave it the respect of actually thinking about it, rather than answering from the place of what seemed right or what was expected. She asked herself honestly what she wanted, and she listened honestly to the answer. "I don't want anything from you," she said. I think I want to know you. If that's," she stopped. "I'm aware that's not a simple thing. I'm aware that what this means for both of us is not simple and will not become simple, and I'm not asking you to make it simple." He lifted his head. He looked at her across the desk. "I'm 26 years old," she continued. "I have a life, I have." She thought of her apartment, the blinking Christmas tree, the floor where she had sat last night in the silence of someone who had accepted solitude as the condition of her existence. "I have built something that is mine. I'm not asking to dismantle it or to step into yours." She paused. "But I sat on my floor last night and I thought I had no one, and then your daughter called me, and now I'm standing here." His expression shifted. Something in it loosened, not broke, not collapsed, but the way a door that has been closed against pressure slowly, carefully opens when the pressure changes. "Camilla called you," he said. "Yes, she didn't know," he said. "She genuinely didn't know." "I believe her," Elena said. "She called me because I was alone on Christmas Eve, and she didn't want me to be alone." She paused. "She has good instincts." Something moved through his face then, something that was, unmistakably, despite everything and beneath everything, pride. The helpless, involuntary pride of a father for his child. "She does," he said quietly. They looked at each other across the desk in the morning light. All the information that had moved through this room in the past 24 hours hung between them, visible, unavoidable, transforming the air itself into something that required careful breathing. "I have a question," Elena said. He waited. "Last night, when you told me about my mother, when you told me I had her eyes," she held his gaze. "Did you already suspect, before Teodoro told me this morning?" The pause that followed was a fraction too long. "I noticed," he said carefully, "certain things when I looked at you. Certain similarities that were not only your mother's." He stopped. "I told myself it was coincidence. I told myself I was looking for things that were not there because—" He stopped again. "Because some part of me had never fully accepted that she simply disappeared, that there was nothing left of what we had." Elena felt the weight of that settle over her. "And if you had asked yourself the real question," she said, "if you had let yourself follow it all the way." He looked at her steadily. "I think I knew," he said, "on some level. I think I knew last night, standing in this room, looking at you, before I had any reason to know it." He paused. "Which is perhaps why I told you about her, which is perhaps why I said what I said." She thought about that. About the intelligence of the body, the way it recognized what the mind refused to confront, the way knowing arrived before understanding, the way she had felt, standing in the entrance hall previous night, a strange and unearned gravity toward a man she was only just meeting. Not attraction. Not exactly. Something older than attraction. Something that had been in her blood since before she had a name for anything. "All right," she said. He looked at her. "All right." She said again, and it was a different kind of word in her mouth this time. Not resignation, not acceptance, but something more like the sound of a decision being made by someone who had taken the full measure of a thing and chosen it anyway. She straightened. She smoothed her sweater with one hand. She looked at him directly, this man who was both a stranger and, impossibly, not. "I'm going to go find Camilla," she said. "And we are going to have Christmas breakfast like reasonable people. And then," she paused, "and then I think you and I need to sit down together, without this room and its history, and start from the beginning." He was quiet for a moment. "The beginning," he said. "Yes," she said. "Whatever that looks like, whatever it takes." She held his gaze. "You have 26 years of missing. I have 26 years of questions. That seems like enough to work with." He stood very still. "And then so rare, so earned, so devastating in its rarity." The corner of his mouth moved. "Not the ghost of it. Not the shadow, the thing itself, small and brief and completely real. "Yes," he said, "I suppose it is." She found Camilla in the hallway outside the study door, not pretending to be doing something else, not manufacturing an excuse for her presence. Simply standing there, she replied at 7:14 in the morning. She had woken before her alarm, which was not unusual. Her body had always treated sleep as a negotiation rather than a certainty, and on mornings when something significant was pending, it tended to conclude the negotiation early and deliver her, blinking and fully conscious, into a day that hadn't yet decided what it was going to be. She lay in bed for a few minutes first, looked at the ceiling, listened to the city beginning its first quiet movements outside. A car, someone's door, the distant compression of a bus. The ordinary machinery of an ordinary morning assembling itself with total indifference to the fact that she was lying in her bed with a 3-line message on her phone from a man who was her father, and whom she had known for approximately 16 hours. She picked up the phone, read the message again. "I have kept many things in my life. I am not a man who keeps things easily or without cost. But I would like, if you are willing, to learn how to be someone who does not have to keep you from a distance." She thought about what her mother would have said about this message. She thought about Isabella Vasquez reading these words, this careful, formal, entirely unadorned expression of something enormous, and what her face would have done. She thought her mother would have recognized it. The specific language of a man who was not practiced in vulnerability and was attempting it anyway, with the same methodical seriousness he applied to everything else. She thought her mother might have smiled. She typed, "I'm willing." She sent it before she could redraft it into something more complicated, because more complicated was not what the moment required, and she was honest enough with herself to know that her instinct toward complexity was sometimes just fear wearing a smarter coat. She put the phone face down on the nightstand. She got up, made coffee, stood at her kitchen window, and watched the city wake up, and thought about what willing actually meant in practice, in the specific and demanding reality of what was going to have to happen now. It meant conversations, many of them. It meant sitting across from a man who had spent 30 years becoming someone particular and formidable, and asking him to become something additional, not instead, but additional. Father was a different architecture than anything else he was. It required different materials. She didn't know yet whether he had them. She suspected he didn't know either. It meant grief, still. Her mother's grief, which she was only now beginning to understand in its full dimensions. Not just the loss of a person, but the weight of a choice, the specific loneliness of someone who had protected a secret so completely that the secret had become structural, had become load-bearing, and when she died, the structure had come down around everyone still living without any of them understanding what had been holding what. It meant Camilla, too, which was its own complicated and unfinished thing. The question of what they were to each other now, with this new information recasting the entire history of their friendship in a light that changed everything and nothing simultaneously. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it, not the unknown number. "Camilla, he's been up since 5. I found him in the study at 6 with your photograph." Alina stared at the message. "What photograph?" She typed back. 3 dots, a pause. Then he had one of you and your mother from a few years ago. I don't know how he got it, and I didn't ask but Alina. He was just sitting there looking at it in the dark, and I don't think he heard me come in. Alina sat down at her kitchen table. She sat with the image of that Dominic Reyes in his study before dawn, alone, holding a photograph of a daughter he hadn't known was his daughter, looking at it in the dark with no audience and no performance and nothing to maintain, and she felt something move through her that was not simple, and did not have a clean name and was, she recognized, the beginning of something she was going to have to learn to carry, not love, not yet. That was too large a word for something that was only just finding its shape. But the thing that came before love, the thing that made love possible, the opening, the willingness to let something matter before you knew how much it was going to cost. She had felt it once before, very young, in a hospital waiting room, before the doctor came out with the information that made everything after it different. She had sat in that waiting room knowing something was wrong and not yet knowing the full shape of it. And she had felt this specific quality of suspension, of standing at the exact edge of before and after, of being someone who was still who she had been and was also about to become someone new. She recognized it. She typed back to Camilla, "Tell him I'll come on Saturday, just him and me, somewhere that isn't the house." She sent it. Then she finished her coffee and went to get dressed and walked out into the first ordinary morning of the most extraordinary chapter of her life. Saturday came with gray skies and the particular cold of a city in the last days of December, not the festive cold of Christmas, which had a kind of permission to it, but the serious cold of stretch between holidays, which meant business and did not apologize. Elena took the subway. Not the black car Camilla had offered, not a taxi, the subway, because she needed the 40 minutes of ordinary motion, the ordinary noise, the ordinary press of ordinary people around her who did not know who she was or where she was going or what she was walking toward. She needed to arrive as herself, uncurated, without the intermediary of someone else's logistics. She had chosen a restaurant she knew. Nothing significant, nothing loaded, a small Italian place in a quiet block that she had been going to for 2 years, where the tables were close together and the light was warm and the food was the kind that required attention, neutral ground, her ground technically. She had made that choice deliberately. He was there before her. She saw him through the window as she approached, sitting at the table she had reserved, back to the wall in the way of someone who had spent enough time in rooms where having his back to the wall mattered that it had become simply the way he sat. He was in dark clothes again, a jacket, no tie. He was looking at the menu with the focused attention he gave to everything, and he had not yet seen her. And she stood for a moment on the pavement outside and looked at him through the glass. She was looking at her father. The sentence still had a strange quality in her mind, not wrong, not impossible, but new in the way that new things were new before repetition made them ordinary. She wondered how long it would take before it settled, whether it ever fully settled, or whether it remained always slightly remarkable, the way the most significant facts of your life tended to remain slightly remarkable, no matter how many years you've spent living inside them. She went in. He stood when he saw her, immediately without calculation, a gesture so instinctive it clearly predated any decision about what this meeting was going to be. She noticed it, she filed it, she said nothing about it. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for choosing somewhere that isn't my house," he said. She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression that might have been the beginning of a smile. "You noticed? I notice most things." He waited until she sat before he sat. "It was the right choice. My house has too much history in it for this." "For this," she agreed. They ordered. The waiter was efficient and unobtrusive and did not linger, as though he sensed that the two people at table 7 had something other than the menu to think about. The restaurant moved around them in its ordinary way. Other tables, other conversations, the sound of someone laughing at something genuinely funny, the smell of garlic and wine and warm bread. Dominic Reyes picked up his water glass and set it down without drinking and said, "I've been thinking about what to say to you. Since Christmas morning, I have thought about very little else. And," she said, "and I've concluded that there is no version of this that I can make adequate," he said. "No statement I can make that accounts for what was lost. What your life," he stopped, the jaw tightening again. "The internal management. I am not a man who makes apologies easily. But I want to be clear that the absence of ease does not indicate the absence of sincerity." Elena looked at him. "I'm not looking for an apology," she said. He met her eyes. I don't know yet exactly what I'm looking for," she said honestly. "I think that's what today is for, to start to find out." She paused. "I know you didn't know. I know that the choices that were not made by you. I'm not carrying this at your door." "Some of it belongs there," he said. "Some of it," she agreed. "The part where you asked her to disappear, the part where keeping her safe from a distance became a habit, a practice." She held his gaze. "That part I'll need time with. I won't pretend otherwise," he nodded. It was a serious nod, not defensive, not explanatory. Accepting, but I'm here, she said. That's also true. I'm here and I'm choosing to be here, and that counts for something. It counts for a great deal, he said quietly. The food arrived. They ate for a few minutes in a silence that was not comfortable exactly, but was not hostile either. It was the silence of two people who were still learning the texture of each other's quiet, still finding out whether they could exist in the same space without the structure of crisis holding them together. They could, she thought. Just tell me about your work, he said. She looked up. It was such an ordinary question. Such a startlingly, almost laughably ordinary question from this man in this context. And yet it was exactly the right question, the question that said, I want to know the ordinary things. I want to start where you actually live. I want to know you from the ground up, she told him. She worked in architectural preservation, the documentation and restoration of buildings that had historical significance, but not always the resources or the attention to survive without advocacy. She had fallen into it accidentally, through a summer job at 20 that had turned out to be less of a job and more of a revelation about the way she thought and what she cared about. She talked about it the way she always talked about work she loved without performance, with the specific animation of someone who had not been asked to be interesting, but simply was on this subject because it mattered to her. He listened. This was, she discovered, something he did extraordinarily well. He did not listen the way people listened when they were waiting for their turn to speak. He listened with the complete, unhurried attention of someone for whom information was genuinely valuable, and other people were its primary source. He asked questions, not many and not complicated, but precise. The questions of someone who was actually following, actually tracking, actually interested. She found herself saying more than she had planned to. You love old things, he said at a pause. I love things that were built to last, she said, and then had to be fought for. There's something about a building that people decided was worth saving, worth the cost and the argument and the bureaucracy of saving it, that I find— She stopped. I find it meaningful that someone decided a thing was worth the effort of continuing. He was quiet for a moment. Your mother, he said carefully, was like that. She had a belief in the value of things that were old and difficult and worth maintaining. He paused. I used to think it was sentimentality. I was wrong. Elena set down her fork. What was she like when you knew her? I want to know what she was like at 20, too. I only knew her from later. When she had already become the version of herself she became after. Everything. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, she was funny. People don't usually. He stopped. I don't think that's the first word most people would expect me to use, but she was. She had a very dry, very quiet sense of humor that she deployed without warning, and the first time she made me laugh, I was so surprised by it that I didn't recognize the feeling immediately. Elena stared at him. She did the same thing to me, she said. My whole childhood. You'd be in the middle of something serious, and she'd say one thing, perfectly placed, and the whole room would change. He looked at her. And across the small table in the warm restaurant, in the last days of December, something happened that was not dramatic, and was not cinematic, and was not the stuff of the kind of story that got told at volume, something quiet and private and enormously significant. They recognized each other. Not for the first time. The recognition had been there from the beginning, from the moment she had walked into his house, and he had found her across a crowded room, with an immediacy that defied logic. But this was different. This was the recognition arriving in full, with its name attached and its history visible, and its weight distributed correctly between them. She looked at her father. He looked at his daughter. The restaurant moved around them, ordinary and unaware and completely irrelevant. She was brave, he said. His voice had changed slightly. Not broken, he would not break. She understood that about him now. It was not in the architecture of him, but altered the way metal altered under heat, not destroyed, but permanently different from what it had been before. What she did raising you alone, with that silence that took a kind of courage that I don't think I fully. He stopped. I think I am only now beginning to understand the full size of it. She was brave. Elena agreed. And I am very angry at her. He looked at her. And I love her more than I have words for, Elena continued. Both of those things are completely true at the same time. I've learned to hold them both. How? He asked. And it was so direct, so simple, so entirely without the armor she had come to expect from him, that for a moment she forgot which one of them was supposed to be learning from the other. Practice, she said, and a certain amount of crying in private. His mouth moved, full and real, the same movement she had seen on Christmas morning, that rare and entirely earned thing. I'll keep that in mind, he said. They stayed until the restaurant began setting tables for dinner service, and the waiter circled with the discreet patience of someone who had seen this before, two people so deep in conversation that the afternoon had simply elapsed around them without their noticing. She noticed eventually, looked at her watch. They had been there for 3 hours. I should go, she said. He didn't argue. He didn't try to extend it. He understood, she thought, the value of leaving while things were still good, the discipline of not overrunning a moment that had been exactly enough. They walked out into the cold street together. The December dark was coming early, the streetlights already on, the city moving in its purposeful early, evening way. She pulled her coat tighter. He stood beside her on the pavement with his hands in his pockets, and they were quiet for a moment, looking at the street. Same time next week, she said. He turned to look at her. If you want, she said. We don't have to, but there's more to talk about, more I want to know, and I think, she paused. I think this works better in small pieces. Yes, he said, it does. A pause. Same time next week, she nodded. She started to move away. Elena, she turned. He was standing under the